when we know who we are, right, that is a form of healing.
My blood, my tribe, my culture was calling me even though I didn't know.
Fully, um, authentically me in every space that I go in, regardless of consequence or scrutiny. I'm choosing to exist without permission. So that's where it connects for me with no fear. I'm free.
When we know who we are, right, that is a form of healing. When we know where we come from, that's a form of healing. And so Artifact is really built to engage a larger group of folks in that process and make accessible to them the tools like Ancestry.com, or even the genetic testing that some folks have done to identify and get a better sense of how they connect, and to give people the tools and the resources to do that deep digging.
And for me to take them in, and be in the midst of it, it was like poison. But taking it in and then putting it out in art is like putting it out as medicine.
Art of Fact is a community-based project that provided the financial and spatial resources for Black and Brown Kalamazoo community members to discover, investigate, and learn more about their ancestry and family history. To that end, along the course of 8 months, Artifact engaged participants in an exploration of history and identity to invite reclamation of internal and external spaces that have been colonized through a genealogical and historical underwriting and erasure, to discover the names and stories of those of us that have been lost, hidden, forgotten, or gone unqueried. Here's a peek into their individual journeys.
I am a daughter. I am a poet. I'm a professor. I'm an artist. And when I think about myself, I think of someone who tries to move through the world in ways that shift us a little bit closer toward equity. And I try to, in my art and even in my teaching, I try to create space for people to think, connect, and live who they are. So, as education director and director of arts for the Institute of Public Scholarship, one of the things that Dr. Johnson asked me to do is, what do you want to do in terms of connecting community, and connecting community using the humanities? And I had already been doing research on my own family history, and like kind of digging into my roots before the early 1900s and trying to find out more about my family. And so just from what I was feeling in terms of the more I got more family story, the more my identity really sort of solidified and grew. And so I thought what I would love to do with people in the community is help them connect to their family stories as well. And so that's sort of how the genealogical part of Artifact began. And because I spend a lot of time turning history into art, whether it's visual art or poetry or plays, it made sense then at some point to connect all of those dots, right? And to see how, in what ways we can take in our stories, in whatever ways they show up, right? We don't have a choice of what our family story looks like, right?
Yeah.
In terms of the history of it, but we do have opportunity as individuals to figure out how we want to then integrate that into our lives. And I think that that the art of fact part of it is a really great way to be able to do that. So that's kind of how it started. I think one of the Artifact workshops, we spent some time talking about that, and some people said, freedom of movement, being able to not be afraid to go to a place, or not be afraid to get out of the car at this gas station in this town. You know, freedom to move. And I think that some other people talked about freedom is being free in yourself, like being able to say, I am who I am, regardless of if it's safe to get out of that car, regardless if it's safe to stop at this place. That sense of self, right? And I think that for me, as a goal of this project, I think if this project does what it can do, both of those kinds of freedom can show up in a way, right? Because when you humanize yourself to other people, which I hate that we have to do that work, but that's the reality of this country, right?
Yeah.
So when you humanize yourself to other people, which art does, right? Like art is, I think, in so many ways, a great humanizer. Because, you know, you put something on stage and people show up, they don't get to talk through it. They
must
see
witness.
You. They must see you, right?
Yeah.
So it's a great sort of equalizer in that way. And so if that happens and people begin to see me and they begin to see me as a human being, then it might not be so scary to get out of those cars because they might not act the way they're acting, right? And if I get that information that I use to create that, I get a better sense of myself. And so then there's more of an opportunity or more of a chance for me to feel stronger in myself. So the sort of like, you know, one side's coming this way, one side's coming this way. And I think that in that way, freedom can come, we can come a little bit closer to freedom, right? So I'm hoping that that's what comes. So yeah, freedom comes. I really do think, you know, we get to be more free in ourselves when we know more and more of who we are. And it's almost like sort of like putting the pieces together. You know, for me, I think I've often felt very, I think I've used grounded before, but also like, okay, so I don't know if this is true or not, but talk a lot about, I had a friend talk to me about indigenous culture, and she's American Indian, and she was saying, you know, the rattle brings pieces of the baby back, pieces of the baby's identity back to itself, and that's why people use a rattle with babies, right? Like the act of rattling is bringing all of those pieces and really all of the family, like ancestors and things like that, to the child. And so I feel like getting these pieces in genealogy work and ancestry work is like the rattle for me. And even if the stories aren't the best stories, like I've gone back, I'm from a really, really small town, so they've digitized, the library has digitized all of the community newspapers from like the, I think, early 1800s, late 1700s to present, and I've spent a lot of time Googling my family names to find out pieces. And some of those pieces aren't so great, you know, and some of those pieces are really wonderful, but it's like that rattle. Each piece is like another piece of me. And so as I get those pieces, I feel much more grounded, so I can jump from there, you know, I can leap from there. And for me, like when I am the most free in my dreams, I'm flying in my dreams, you know what I mean? And so
I do.
It's giving me more pieces. And yeah, and I love what you said about, you know, taking those pieces and getting to transform them in ways that they become useful. During the artifact process, you know, one of the things I've been questioning a lot is like, where did the violence stem from in my family, right? So my grandfather, very, you know, he was an alcoholic on weekends and very violent on the weekends. And his sons ended up mostly being alcoholics and drug addicts, and there's a history of violence. And from what I heard, his father, my grandfather's father, was also violent. So I kept wondering, where was the root of that?
Like looking up from my ancestry, like the information that I had gave her, and then I remember like ever since then I was like a little bit hesitant to even just dig into what she had found or just what my ancestry was.
Is Monica also Native American?
Yeah.
Okay, and so she knew that you were Native American, and somehow that you didn't have information about your family history or lineage, so she...
Yeah, there's so many different things, like, So I guess I'll just kind of start talking and see what things come out. But I found that a lot of my family on both sides of my family come from Virginia. That, as I said before, my town is predominantly white, southeastern Ohio, close to West Virginia. So this is what I found out, kind of. So
Okay.
a lot of the people a lot of my family are still in the town. It's called Cadiz. It's spelled Cadiz. They're there and they've been there for a long time, but in part some of them came from, so when the town was really not fully a town yet, you know what I mean?
Times, yeah.
Yeah, in those times when it wasn't fully a town yet, they lived on the outskirts. So just as the town began to form, moving into the town proper, so a lot of them had farmland outside of the town. But it was like the township, or the county. So one side of the family was freed from, or one part of my, one side of the family was freed by this man who decided that he was going to free all the people he claimed to own, all the enslaved people that he had on his plantation. And he sent money ahead for them to be settled in a town called McIntyre. There's also another man who sent money ahead for a town on the other side of the town proper that I live in now, and it's called Little Zion or Little Stillwater.
Okay.
And it's a town of enslaved people that were freed and some that escaped, and so it's another black settlement. I have family from each of those settlements.
Interesting.
And I didn't know that until I knew of McIntyre a bit, but I didn't really know the extent of it growing up. But then I found out about the other town, Little Zion, just because I ran across a flyer, pamphlet in my great grandmother's things, which sent me sort of on the journey to find the actual graveyard that's the only thing that's left right now. Ancestry work, I found the story of part of that family has their white ancestors, and in the 1700s, the white ancestor, he was married, and he'd been married, and he was in his 70s, and all of a sudden he killed his wife with a broomstick, and then his sons, one of them killed their brother, and so I felt like, okay, this is that lineage, and this is the direct line to my grandfather.
Oh wow.
And so I found that out, and I believe that the violence has to start somewhere, but it was just such an interesting story, and I'm still trying to find out more about how that white side of the family became my black grandfather. In the artifact work too, I've also, getting into the newspapers, I found that one of my great grand uncles, he sold fish. He had a fish cart, and so he started selling food early, and that's kind of like what I do in so many ways.
Yeah.
I found
she's a chef.
I'm a chef. I first started, I'm a vegan chef. But also that one of my uncles was a musician, and so I'm just finding out, these pieces. I found out my great grandmother that raised me was a WPA chef. She started to be a WPA cook, and that's the Works project that why am I losing the president's name? Right after the Great Depression, he instituted this project Works, so that he brought newspaper people, the government money to get people back to work. So she became a cook for the WPA and ended up cooking in schools and things like that. And so I just get to find, and that's like census data. So just finding all of these different pieces of myself and finding out more about the town that I said I didn't know about through artifact work. I'm finding some of those ancestors that were in the Civil War as black soldiers, and just finding all of this data. And what that's really done for me is I grew up in a town where there were so many places that black people couldn't go, too dangerous, right, to go. And the town that I just told you about that I didn't know about is actually in an area where a lot of white people that's like kind of mixed with two different populations. Really rich white people that live on the lakes out there, and really rural white people that have Confederate flags. But either way, we were never supposed to go there. I never thought we were ever really rooted there. But we're some of the first families there. You know what I mean?
Wow.
And so I
And
realized-
you saw this when you went back?
When I went back, probably like maybe 5 years ago or so, and then finding out through artifact work, finding out the census data and digging more into it, and finding out Civil War soldiers were part of that group, but finding out that we had always been there, you know. And I know that if I would have known that, my identity would have felt very different in that town. I still probably wouldn't have gone there because it's not safe.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I definitely would have felt like I belonged more. You know, being a first family, no matter what town you're in, is always there's some kind of importance to that. And there were so many first families of white people, and, you know, building